Hey everybody, Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Reflex Steering Stabilizer on our 2018 Entegra Vision motorhome. Now, a lot of things can make your motorhome veer or possibly just swerve over to the side. Because let's face it, there's a lot of area for wind to catch, so if we're driving down the road and a big gust of wind comes, it's end up pushing us. And then we end up fighting that steering wheel to keep our motorhome going straight and keep it under control. Well, that's not very comfortable, and over time you end up getting tired, so by the time we get to the place we're going, we're going to be exhausted. Well, that's where our Reflex Steering Stabilizer is going to help out. It's going to keep our motorhome tracking straight regardless of a dip in the road, possibly a big gust of wind or anything like that, because it's going to constantly want to keep our motorhome tracking straight. So let's go ahead and take our test course and see how our motorhome handles. Now we're going to come up to our slalom course here. I'm going to be going at the course about 10 miles an hour just to keep a nice consistent basis. But even just going through the parking lot, I can already feel a difference. I can relax a little bit, not have such a death grip on the steering wheel, making sure I have to have so much control of it, because as I'm coming in and out of the turns, the steering wheel wants to naturally come back to the neutral state. Makes it a lot easier to go in and out of those turns without having to worry about oversteering to get it back to center and go where we need to go. Now when we get to the bump scores here, I'm going to be going over them about 5 miles an hour. Now keep in mind, really, our steering stabilizer is not going to have a whole lot of effect on the bump scores, except when we get to the alternating speed bumps, because that's going to simulate like a pothole on one side. Our steering wants to catch it and pull to the left. But as you can see, I'm barely holding on, barely just a couple fingers holding onto the steering wheel, and it is moving when we hit those potholes, but it's coming back to center and it's continuing to drive straight, and I'm not having to grab on so hard and really make sure that it's staying where I want it to be. I can relax and enjoy my motorhome and not have to worry about such a stressful driving experience. And even just driving through the parking lot, whenever I make a large turn, like coming around, making a U-turn here, you can see the steering wheel want to come back to center. I can just loosen up my grip a little bit, and the steering wheel will straighten itself out. It's a lot nicer than having to turn the wheel back and oversteer and try to overcompensate for everything going on. Again, you just relax and actually enjoy your motorhome rather than having to fight the steering wheel, being exhausted by the time you get where you're going. So here's what our steering stabilizer looks like once we have it installed. Now it's going to mount in between our tie rod here on one end, and if we follow it down, it's going to mount to the front axle on the other end. And that's what's going to be joining the front axle and the tie rod together with this strong spring, so we're going to have a constant pressure trying to keep our vehicle going straight, so we're not going to have to fight the steering wheel. Now the way it's going to actually work is right now both of our tires are pointing straight and it's in a neutral position. But once we turn, the tie rod is going to either move to the left or the right, and that's either going to expand the spring or compress it down. Well, the way springs work is they're naturally going to want to go back to the neutral state. So if we do compress it, there's going to be a natural force of the spring pushing outward, trying to get the tires centered. And the same thing is if the spring stretches out, it's going to have that tension wanting to come back to the neutral state. So no matter if we have a big crosswind, a dip in the road, or anything else, our tie rod and our steering is always going to want to return to center. Now when it comes to the installation, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to have to mount a bracket up, and then we mount our steering stabilizer to that bracket. One thing to keep in mind is you will need an impact that's powerful enough to take off the front U-bolts on the axle here, which they're pretty tight, so you will need a pretty high impact as well as to put them back on and torque them down. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. There's no special tools aside from that impact that you're going to need. And you don't have to use a lift to get this in place. You can do it with all the tires on the ground. We just used a lift so we get the camera under here and show you everything a little bit better. But now that we've seen what it looks like and gone over some of the features, let's walk through the installation together. Now the first step is you want to park your motorhome on a nice flat level surface. You want to make sure that the tires and the steering wheel are pointing straight. Then we want to move underneath the front axle here, and at the back of the front axle we'll find our two U-bolts that are holding our leaf springs in place. Now we need to remove these nuts, but they're extremely tight, so you may want to soak them down with some penetrating oil, or make sure you have a powerful enough impact to take them off and put them back on. We'll grab a 1 1/8 inch socket and we'll remove the 2 nuts. You want to make sure you hold on to the washer and the nut, and we'll remove the other one as well. Then we want to grab our axle bracket here. You notice it's going to have a long oblong hole, somewhat of a larger one and then a smaller one. We want the oblong hole to go towards the outside of the tire, and we want the small hole to go towards the back of the motorhome. We're going to slide it over our U-bolts so it's sitting on the frame just like this. I'm going to take the factory hardware and we'll just loosely replace it. So we'll get our washer in place, and you want to grab the nut, and for now at least just get it hand tight so the bracket's not going to fall off. Then we're going to replace the hardware on the other side of our U-bolt as well and tighten it down. Now whenever you do go to tighten these down, I do want to mention that you want to tighten these down kind of crossing, going back and forth, so that it pulls on that U-bolt evenly and the clamp will go up and it won't get in a bind. So you just want to alternate going back and forth while you're tightening them. Now at this point we want to grab our tie rod bracket. And you'll notice it kind of has a dip in it and then a section that's going to taper off and go to a round hole on the end. We want that round hole to be pointing towards the front axle, and we want the dip to grab onto the bottom of our tie rod right here. So we want our bracket to sit just like this. And then we want to grab both of the U-bolts from our kit. We're going to remove the nut on each end and the washers on the inside. And we want to take our U-bolt and go around the tie rod coming from the top so it drops down through our bracket just like that. So once we have the legs of the U-bolts going through, I want to grab one of those washers, slide it over one of the legs, and then we're going to take the nylon lock nut and secure it down. And we're going to do that for each one of the U-bolt legs. So once we get this first one installed and we have our nuts and washers in place, we'll put the other U-bolt on the other side. Now we want to leave these pretty loose for now, so we have plenty of movement to move our tie rod bracket wherever we may need. But you do want to get both of them in place and have them at least hand tight on the nuts for the U-bolts. Now you can see we got plenty of movement in there. If you do tighten up those nuts, you just want to make it to where you can still move your bracket fairly easily. That way we can make any kind of adjustments that we may need to. Now at this point we can grab our steering stabilizer, but I want to bring your attention to the very bottom of it where this large silver piece is and where the coil spring ends. You can see there's a little notch there. You want to make sure that that spring is fully seated onto it, and the way you're going to do that is just hold the spring and rotate the rest of the body of the steering stabilizer so that it bottoms out against that stop there. It's very important before we put it in there that we make sure that spring is seated properly. Now we're going to start on the side that we mounted our frame bracket. We want to grab one of the 1/2 inch bolts out of our kit. We're going to pass it through from the top going down. And we're going to pass a flat washer over it. We want to grab the end of our steering stabilizer that does not have the spring on it, so the end that looks more like a shock. Now it may be a little awkward to lift up, but you want to make sure that that washer goes in between the bushing and the bracket itself. So we'll lift up our steering stabilizer, make sure that bolt goes all the way through, and then we're going to follow it up with another flat washer on the outside of the bushing. And then right now we're just going to loosely secure it with a 1/2 inch nylon lock nut. Just want to get at least a couple threads on there, make sure that steering stabilizer isn't going to fall, and this end should support itself. Now if we move further down, kind of want to hold it pretty straight, and we can see this is why we wanted that movement to be left for our tie rod, so we get everything mounted up. This time we're going to take our bolt and we're going to go through the bottom of our tie rod bracket. Take another one of our flat washers, go over the bolt, take the free end of our stabilizer, go over that, and then finish it up again with another flat washer and a nylon lock nut. Now when we go to tighten our hardware, I like to start on the frame bracket first because this doesn't have any movement to it. So this will kind of let us know how the end of our steering stabilizer is going to sit. I'm using a 3/4 inch wrench and socket. Just keep in mind when you're tightening these down, you just want to snug them down to where the two washers are going to make contact with that bushing because you don't want to crush them. We'll hold that nut on top with our wrench and tighten up from the bottom. And we'll do the same thing for the other side of our steering stabilizer bracket. For our tie rod bracket here, we're going to use a 9/16 socket. And again, whenever you're tightening those U-bolts up, you just kind of want to do it in a cross pattern. So we'll tighten up one a little bit, switch to the other one. And when you're tightening these up, you kind of want to make sure your steering stabilizer is nice and level so we can get the bracket to line up properly as well. Once you have all your hardware snugged down, you're going to want to come back with the torque wrench. We're going to torque them all down to the specified amount in the instructions. And again, whenever you're doing the U-bolts, you kind of want to go back and forth so you make sure you have an even clamping force and it's not binding up. As soon as we're done with these, we'll go back and tighten up all the rest of our remaining hardware. Now that we've got everything torqued down, we can lower our motorhome down and take it out for a quick test drive. Now if you feel that your motorhome is pulling or veering one way or another, the way to fix that is you want to come back underneath, loosen up your U-bolts, and get it into that relaxed position, and then retighten and torque them down, and then retest drive it. With all that being said, again, I'm Rob here at eTrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Reflex Steering Stabilizer on our 2018 Entegra Vision motorhome.